Have you ever heard of a doctor who prescribed starvation as a cure? A woman who was known as the Starvation Doctor? Imagine a world where food is considered a poison and starvation a remedy. Welcome to the world of Dr. Linda Burfield Hazzard, an early 20th century self-proclaimed fasting specialist who is notorious for her unconventional medical practices. Dr. Hazzard's name is as ominous as her reputation. Known infamously as the Starvation Doctor, her treatment methods were far from the norm. She was a staunch advocate of fasting for health, asserting that the body could heal itself by abstaining from food. While this may sound like a modern-day detox or cleanse, Hazzard's methods were much more extreme, often leading her patients to the brink of death. Her approach to medicine was not only radical, but also deadly. It's estimated that over 15 people died under her care, their bodies wasted away to mere skeletons. Despite these tragic outcomes, Hazzard continued to preach her fasting gospel, asserting that the deaths were not due to her methods, but rather the patient's inability to adhere to her strict regimen. The controversy surrounding Dr. Hazzard was as palpable as the fear she instilled in her patients. Her name became synonymous with death and despair, and yet she managed to maintain a following. Hazzard's charisma and confidence in her methods were so persuasive that many were drawn to her, like moths to a flame, desperate for a cure to their ailments. Yet, behind the facade of a dedicated healer was a woman shrouded in mystery. Questions swirled around her credentials, her intentions, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths of her patients. Her life was a complex web of intrigue and suspicion, a chilling tale of a woman who pushed the boundaries of medicine and morality. Now let's delve into the mysterious life of Dr. Linda Hazzard, the woman who advocated for fasting for the cure. Prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of darkness as we uncover the enigma that is Dr. Linda Hazzard. Our story begins in the late 19th century with a girl named Linda, destined to become an infamous figure in medical history. Born in 1867 in Minnesota, Linda Burfield Hazzard was an ordinary child with an extraordinary future. She grew up in a world where medicine was evolving, but her interests lay beyond the realm of traditional medical practices. She was drawn to alternative medicine, a field that was largely unexplored and unregulated. From an early age, Linda was fascinated by the human body and its capacity to heal itself. This interest grew into an obsession, leading her to explore the world of fasting and its potential benefits. She believed that the human body could be cleansed and rejuvenated through prolonged periods of starvation. Despite having no formal medical education, Linda was not deterred. In a time when women were largely excluded from the medical field, she carved her own path. She studied the works of Edward Hooker Dewey, a pioneer of therapeutic fasting, and Louis Kuhn, a German naturopath. Their teachings formed the foundation of her beliefs and methods. Linda's insatiable curiosity and determination led her to become a self-proclaimed fasting specialist. She used the title of doctor, even though her only credential was a dubious degree from the correspondence course of the American School of Naturopathy. This lack of formal medical training, however, did not stop her from opening her own practice. Her methods were unconventional, even alarming, but they appealed to a certain demographic. She promised health and vitality through fasting, and people flocked to her, entrusting their lives to this charismatic woman who seemed to defy the norms of medicine. But beneath this veneer of health and rejuvenation, a darker reality was lurking. Linda's practices were not just unconventional, they were dangerous. Her patients were not just fasting, they were starving. And as she continued to practice her methods, the line between doctor and predator began to blur. Linda's lack of formal medical training did not deter her, it only fueled her ambition. Little did the world know, a storm was brewing. A sanitarium, a place of healing, or in Linda's case, a place of horror. Welcome to the chilling realm of Linda Hazzard's Starvation Sanitarium. Nestled in the verdant expanses of Olalla, Washington, this establishment was no ordinary retreat. It was here that Linda Hazzard, a self-proclaimed fasting specialist, embarked on her perilous experiment of therapeutic fasting. This sanitarium, or as some would call it, the House of Horrors, was the manifestation of Hazzard's unwavering belief in the curative power of prolonged fasting. She fervently advocated that fasting is nature's remedy, and it was the only way to purge the body of its ailments. Her method, however, was far from conventional. It involved a brutal regimen of minimal food and excessive exercise, pushing the human body to its absolute limits. A diverse array of patients found themselves under Hazzard's care, lured by the promise of a revolutionary cure. They were drawn from all walks of life, from the robust and hearty to the fragile and ailing. Many were desperate, seeking a miraculous recovery where traditional medicine had failed. They willingly, albeit unknowingly, surrendered themselves to Hazzard's unorthodox methods. As days turned into weeks, these patients were subjected to an intense regimen of prolonged fasting, lasting as long as 2 months at a stretch. They were fed a meager diet of tomato and asparagus broth, supplemented with small doses of orange juice. The debilitating physical strain was paired with taxing mental exertion, as Hazzard often required her patients to partake in rigorous physical activities. Horrifyingly, the sanitarium's walls echoed with the weakening voices of its residents, their bodies wasting away under the severe deprivation. Yet, in the face of their suffering, Hazzard remained unyielding, convinced that she was purifying their bodies and saving their souls. The Starvation Sanitarium stands as a grim testament to the macabre lengths that Hazzard was willing to go, all in the name of her misguided belief in therapeutic fasting. Patients arrived seeking healing, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare of starvation. Enter the Williamson Sisters, 2 unsuspecting victims of Dr. Hazzard's deadly cure. In the early 20th century, British nationals Claire and Dorothea Williamson found themselves under the spell of Dr. Linda Hazzard's revolutionary fasting therapy. The sisters, who hailed from a wealthy family, were in search of a holistic treatment to improve their health. Little did they know, their pursuit of wellness would lead them down a path of severe malnutrition and ultimately, death. The Williamson sisters arrived at the Starvation Sanitarium, a place that promised rejuvenation and vitality. Dr. Hazzard, with her charismatic personality and compelling promises of health, soon had the sisters under her complete control. The sisters willingly subjected themselves to a diet of minuscule portions of tomato and asparagus broth, believing in the healing power of the good doctor's treatments. As the days turned into weeks, the sisters' health deteriorated rapidly. Their bodies became skeletal, their minds weak and confused. Yet, Dr. Hazzard convinced them that this was a normal part of the healing process. Claire, the weaker of the two, succumbed to the brutal regimen first. Her body, ravaged by starvation, could not continue to function, and she passed away in May of 1911. Dorothea, though weakened, managed to send a desperate plea for help to their family lawyer. By the time help arrived, Dorothea was on the brink of death, and the horrifying truth of Dr. Hazzard's starvation cure was revealed. The Williamson sisters' tragic story shook the public. The once esteemed Dr. Linda Hazzard was exposed for the fraud she was. Her promises of health and vitality were nothing more than a dangerous play on the vulnerability of those desperate for a cure. Their tragic end marked the beginning of Linda's downfall. The sisters' ordeal sparked an investigation into the Starvation Sanitarium, leading to the eventual exposure and fall from grace of the infamous Starvation Doctor. Every horror story has its climax, and Linda Hazzard's was no different. Our tale now takes us to the fateful aftermath of the Williamson sisters' demise, a shocking event that would forever change the course of Dr. Hazzard's life. The death of the 2 British nationals sent shockwaves around the world, causing an uproar that led to a thorough investigation into the practices of the so-called Starvation Doctor. The local authorities, once turning a blind eye to the doctor's unconventional methods, were now under pressure to act. The world watched with bated breath as the investigation unfolded, revealing a shocking web of malpractice and deceit. As the intricate details of Hazzard's starvation regime came to light, the public's horror grew. Stories emerged of patients emaciated to the point of death, their bodies ravaged by the extreme diet Hazzard had prescribed. The doctor, once a beacon of hope for those desperate for a cure, was now seen as a harbinger of death. The trial of Dr. Hazzard was a media sensation. The court was filled to the brim with observers, journalists, and victims' families, all eager to witness the downfall of the infamous Starvation Doctor. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and the jury needed little time to reach a verdict. Dr. Linda Hazzard was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 2 years in prison. But even behind bars, Hazzard's influence was felt. Her controversial book, Fasting for the Cure of Disease, continued to sell, and even after her release, she attracted a small but devoted following. Yet her reputation was forever tarnished, and her sanitarium, once a place of hope, was now a symbol of death and despair. The Starvation Doctor's reign of terror had ended, but her legacy of horror lived on. The chilling tale of Dr. Linda Hazzard serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of blind faith.